Thank you, Rowley. Good morning. I am Clara Jimenez, and I am honored to serve as today service coordinator. Our pastor, Reverend Dr. Leon Dankley, is away this week. Our guest speaker is Tim Traver, who will be offering a reflection entitled Meditations on a Lawn, One Small Way to Combat Climate Change. Tim's bio is in the order of service, and I will introduce him a bit later in the service. First, a few announcements. If you are visiting today, we would love you to sign the book that is at the back of the church. Chloe is not here today to lead the spiritual exploration children, but also I don't see children, but Adrian Tans, anyway, is here to take her place. Adrian is the children's librarian at the Norman Williams Library, and he is no stranger to North Chapel, so thank you for being here. We are still with some COVID precautions, that's why we are still wearing masks, and we are now invited to sing masked and perhaps a bit quietly to avoid projecting a lot. There is still no coffee hour in the parlor, but we invite you to join us outside for lemonade and conversation after the service. There are also a lot of things going on at the North Chapel each week. Please take the time to read the announcements in the order of service and visit the church website for all the news. This week in particular, there are a lot of events. I see in the service, from the blood drive to the electric vehicle event to the celebration of our Change the World kids graduating. So please check them out. We conclude today the theme for July, which was the 7th principle of the UU, respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. It is thus most appropriate that we close this theme with a reflection on climate change. Respecting the deep connection and interdependence with all other beings on this planet often requires us to act. The beauty of Earth calls us to acknowledge its fragility, our fragility, and do our part to protect it, be it on a grand mission to save the polar ice caps, or more likely, to rethink our lawn. Here is a poem by James Cruz. You belong. Step out and breathe in the fog that smudges this summer morning. Touch the hot pink petals of echinacea studded with droplets, each of which contains whole planets you will never set foot on. Know that you also hold many worlds unseen inside you, as do the tiny leopard frogs who leap up out of the way when you walk through the grass. Let the wet blades stroke your legs, soak your sandals, and call each shiver evidence of your aliveness. Prove that you too belong on the earth.
Hello. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. It's great to be here. I do have a love-hate relationship with my lawn. Mostly, though, I love grass, and I just don't like the way we do it, you know, in this country, because I think, well, we'll get into that. Just really glad to be here, and this space is just so remarkable, and to see all of you here, and it's a joy and a privilege. And we live in a temperate zone. I think of the people out west who are broiling, and it's just so sad. There's so much to be grateful for here with you all. I had a bad dream about this. I wasn't going to share it, but now I think I will. Yeah. So in the dream, I'm sitting in this space back here, and a hymn comes up, and it turns out that the job of the person providing the reflection is to sing the hymn, locked arm in arm, you know, with an old friend, and walking around the congregation and singing this hymn. And that was the first part of the dream. That wasn't too bad. The second part was that just before I was to give the reflection, a young man stood up in the congregation in the middle with a big smile on his face. And I said, that's not part of the program. And he just stood there quietly, silently for the longest time, smiling, until someone in the back of the congregation sang a note. And pretty soon, everybody in the congregation was improvising around that note. And it was lovely and beautiful, and I was telling my wife about it. She said, well, how did you feel about all that? And I said, well, I was kind of embarrassed by it, but I love the idea of the singing congregation and the improvising congregation around music. And I think of that, you know, that dream is kind of the dream of the song church, you know. I miss the choir music so much and the singing. So this morning I think of myself as a kind of warm-up act for my wife, Delia, because she's coming in a few weeks to give the reflection. And she's going to talk about, you know, the social change work she is doing, which I think is so fascinating and wonderful. Whereas I'm really just talking about the lowly, common, basic, you know, grass blade and grass. So hopefully they'll balance each other. They'll be polar opposites, and they'll somehow make sense together. But so where to begin here? I think it's common knowledge that the way we love our lawns, in this world, and we spend, you know, an amazing amount of time and energy and water and chemistry on those lawns, and it's really hurting the planet. And I think the way we treat our lawns is symptomatic of the way we treat the world, whether we talk about industrial agriculture and there's just a better way of doing it, and I think it's the transformation that we need. You know, but we love the smell of recently cut grass. We love our parks, and it's just a question of just how big we go, you know, with these lawns. I want to talk about the roots of the whole lawn, love of lawns. The American lawn has its roots in the European aristocracy. Big, sweeping mowed meadows were signals of wealth and power. Immigrants coming to this country didn't carry a lawn with them or have a lawn in their minds when they arrived in America. They might have brought seeds with them. They might have had goats or a cow in the old country, grazing a patch in that small space between the barn and the home. Or they may have had a thin pasture and had some grass there that they kept with a scythe. And grass was fodder. Grass, every bit of it was scythed up and dried and put up in barns with the hope of there being enough. Big lawns were elite symbols of influence and power. Nobles, kings, and queens had them. Poor farmsteads in early America really didn't. For almost all, grass was too valuable, and time was too valuable. And that all began to change with the exodus from rural America to cities, and from there, from cities, especially after the Second World War, to suburbs. Front lawns that all looked the same, basically, that gave a sense of vastness. In places like Levittown, in Middle America, it turns out, were evocative symbols of the American dream, available not just to nobles. So marketeers seized on that knowledge, and today the lawn care industry is huge. Between mowing equipment and fertilizers and turf builders and herbicides and insecticides, and the private lawn care providers that bring to our back door, among other needless inventions, the leaf blower. Americans spend upwards of $130 billion annually on lawn care. And that's tens of millions of acres of lawn turf we maintain collectively. And the way we do it is really terribly harmful to insect life, to land and water ecosystems, and to the climate. In Great Britain, by some estimates, insect populations have been reduced by 75%. As E.O. Wilson put it, if human beings suddenly disappeared from the planet, nature would find its balance and keep going. But if insects disappeared, life as we know it on the planet would disappear, would collapse. My lawn care memoir began probably around the age of 9, mowing our lawn and the lawns of our neighbors. I can still remember the sound of our reel type self-propelled lawnmower. And I wonder how many of you have those early memories of mowing lawns and the sounds of that in the neighborhood and the smell of that. Eventually my brother, who was really clever, way more clever than me, turned the 4-horse Briggs & Stratton engine into a go-kart. And I was just amazed by that. How did he do that? And he's gone on to, invent all kinds of stuff. My relationship with grass grew after Delia and I got married. Our first job together was to run a bird sanctuary in Newport, Rhode Island. This is an old farm with large fields returning to forests. Agriculture was disappearing from coastal southern New England at the time, and still is. And so were grassland birds, like the beautiful eastern meadowlark and the bobolink, the grasshopper and savanna sparrows. And I found myself on the side of the grass, constantly fighting a losing battle to try to keep those old fields mowed. I drove an ancient Ford 9N tractor that overheated and had to be rested every 20 minutes or so. And was later sold for parts. I was very glad to see that happen to that old tractor. But it was pretty impossible and not very smart to try to do that work with a tractor. Animals grazing in those fields might have been a better solution. Maybe fire as a way to control that growth. And maybe we shouldn't have been doing any of that and just left the grasslands to the forest, which is really eventually what happened. Later in graduate school, I took a project on Block Island for the Audubon Society, another coastal farm, a grassland that did have grazing on it, and my job was to inventory the plants and animals and create a management plan. It was my first attempt, and only actually, to identify grasses by their scientific names. Grasses often look alike. It can be hard to identify them. They have flowers, but these are so reduced, you sometimes need a magnifier to really see them. And it's one of the reasons that grasses can so successfully colonize harsh and disturbed environments. They have a low profile, nothing fancy. Their seeds are light and yet coated. They often float on the wind. They can survive being buried for years. They're resilient enough to survive flood and drought and fire, all of what's coming at us as the climate shifts towards hotter. On Block Island, many rare birds and rare plants and animals were associated with that grassland. We had the state's few remaining upland sandpipers, and a barn owl lived in a hole in the seaside cliff. There were rare butterflies like fritillaria, Spay area, Delia, that lived on native orange milkweed. Wonders, really. I lived in a converted corn crib that summer, and one of the most interesting animals we tried to inventory was the giant American burying beetle. It's a big beetle, and it's very rare, and it finds its prey is dead animals, mostly small mammals, and it gets under them and digs and digs and digs and buries this decomposing animal and lays its eggs on top. And then the eggs hatch into larvae, and they go about living on the food that's there, that the parent has placed there. And giant burying beetles actually are good parents. They hang around and take care of those young animals. They're very interesting. So at night we'd set up a black light, and we'd attract in all kinds of things. And the big beetles sounded like single prop planes coming in and hitting the sheet that was lit up by a black light, and we'd mark them. One of the most interesting things I did during that period was to travel into rural Slovakia on a professional exchange. There we went up into the White Carpathian Mountains and met with peasant agriculturalists and restorationists who were scything as volunteers these cultivated strips of land that had been cultivated like that for centuries. And that had led to one of the most diverse collections of orchids anywhere in Europe. Just the very different styles that the families had in cultivating their strip of grass. And then my last official assignment in the grass field was on Cape Cod. I was working on a book about a salt marsh. And salt marshes are highly productive grasslands that, among other things, buffer and sequester polluting nitrates. They're coming off of land and into shallow coastal ecosystems and polluting them. And they get over-enriched, and the algae come up, and all kinds of things disappear. So fertilizer runoff is just a huge issue on the Cape. And that they needed education, and I was their educator for the summer. I learned so much. So I do love grasses and grassland systems. It's just that the lawns we keep are kind of deserts biologically. They don't have a lot of biodiversity. Although if you stop fertilizing them and you stop treating them with other chemicals to kill everything that's not grass, they can become really quite diverse. And when you stop mowing sections of them, and I wouldn't recommend that you do this with all of your lawn because your neighbors will revolt. And when we first started this, actually, we've been in the house for 27 years. One of our neighbors is Kathy English, who's got one of the most beautiful gardens in the Upper Valley, in Charlotte. And I think they saw the chaos that we were creating in our yard, and were pretty shocked by it. And I think they're used to us now, and we're good friends. But it can be stunning. So we let go of about a quarter acre when we first moved there, and now that has got fruit trees on it and all kinds of wildflowers. And it doesn't look like a lawn anymore. We put a little facsimile of a stone wall and planted a red cedar, a juniper, and it looks like something out of southern New England. I think we were trying to recreate, that look of a pasture, an old field. So that happened. And then this year with the No Mow May and the articles in the New York Times about converting your lawn and stopping cutting all of it, we let the last quarter acre go. And we try to keep it nice and neat by mowing a little strip around it and a few, so we gave it a border of mown grass. And so far the neighbors, have been curious and really supportive. And a few have done this on their own. And it's just beautiful what comes up. When you mow a lawn every week, nothing comes to fruition except perhaps the white clover, which is wonderful, and the lowly white violets. They're low enough to avoid the blade, but I think of them in a way as sort of all frustration. If I were to go digging for a greater metaphor this morning, I would say that it's something like, it's about the value of letting the grasses and whatever else other treasures lie down in there unexpressed, letting them bloom and grow and form seeds, since that's what all life strives for, including our own. And sometimes I think I can hear that grass, the asters, the mints, silently expressing that desire to fully manifest their green selves. One of the first observers of the new meadow we created years ago in the back part of the property was my daughter Cal, who said, it's loud, the lawn is louder. And it was, because there were all kinds of grasshoppers and crickets and beetles and bees and all kinds of life that hadn't been there. And they really came alive. This year it was the same thing. There's a lot of biodiversity in a lawn that you just don't see. So, purple violets come up and the paintbrush and lattice-like bedstraw, the mysterious seed heads of the grasses themselves. So much of our lawn flora or our meadow flora in New England is not native to here. Some 80% of what you see in the fields coming up is old world, which is just the way it is. They're now totally naturalized. But is this something you should do? I think it's worth it. It's worth the try. If you have a house, we're lucky to have one and a lawn. It is something that's replicable, in hundreds, thousands of places, and we can, I think, provide homes for bees and other pollinators. And it doesn't have to be the whole lawn. It could be just a small part of it. I found that letting the grass grow higher, I've read it allows for deeper roots. So these meadow lawns can survive drought maybe a little better than a grass lawn mowed close. And that's the advice that we gave people on the Cape. If they had to, first off, don't fertilize. You really don't need to fertilize a lawn. They're survivors. They don't need more food. A lot of that runs off when you get to the midsummer, like now, where the grass isn't growing. So, but also, when you cut your grass, cut it high. Go up to the highest bar and leave as much as you can, and leave the cuttings because they're full of nitrogen and food, for the roots. I still mow the little bits of our lawn that are left are more like paths, and we've created this sort of unwittingly, this labyrinth that's fun to walk, and we mow that. The rest I mow with a scythe, and scything is a wonderful kind of meditation, using a scythe. It sounds nice. You can get them, the real old world type, with a very thin, sharp blade. It's easy to keep sharp. And There's something that Wendell Berry wrote that I love in a poem. Can't remember the name of the poem, but he says in there's a line, he says, cultivation shows a dark, graceful wilderness at its heart. He's talking about a marriage, and he's also talking about land, and that somehow the poem joins the two. I can get the name of that poem and put it in the notes here. But I love that idea. And there is a line at which you're not honoring that dark, graceful wilderness that needs to come out, be expressed. And so I think this is a great time to rethink everything, everything we do, including the little old lawn that we keep, and how we get around, and how we live, how we cultivate food. It's a big reinvention point for all of us. So that's my humble offering this morning, the humble grass, the humble lawn. I do love grasslands, and we have native grasslands, even up here in Vermont, that need to be, recognized and protected. So next time I get up here, maybe years from now, watch out, because that person may stand up in the middle of the congregation, and we may start singing, some kind of an improv thing. And people may be having to waltz around this room. So be forewarned. Thank you very much.